The bus screeched to a stop outside the training compound, its brakes groaning under the weight of a dozen recruits and the heavy silence that had settled over them. Dust swirled in the dry morning air as the doors hissed open, and one by one, they stepped down onto the gravel. Boots struck the ground with varying degrees of confidence. Some stomped hard, puffing their chests, while others stumbled, already overwhelmed by the suffocating atmosphere of the base. She was the last to descend. Her frame was lean, almost fragile, compared to the broad-shouldered men towering ahead of her. She adjusted the strap of her duffel bag, pulling it higher against her shoulder. Sunlight caught her face for a brief second before she lowered her gaze, as if retreating from notice. She wasn't nervous, at least not in the way the others thought. She was watchful, measured. The world had taught her long ago that silence was the best armor. Move it, move it. You've got 5 seconds before I make you wish you'd never been born. The instructor's voice exploded across the yard like a rifle shot. He was tall, his jaw set in permanent disdain, his uniform immaculate. His words weren't just instructions, they were a warning. The recruits scrambled into formation, tripping over their own bags and each other. She moved quickly, but without panic, stepping into line with the others. She kept her eyes forward, her face expressionless. In her silence, she disappeared, a shadow among louder, sweatier bodies. But silence, she would learn, is never truly invisible. The instructors circled the formation like wolves, their eyes hunting weakness. They stopped at the largest men, barking challenges, demanding push-ups, calling them liars when they claimed to be ready. Some recruits puffed their chests, flexing strength they hadn't been asked to show. Others shrank visibly, shrinking deeper into themselves. When the lead instructor stopped in front of her, his eyes narrowed. She could feel his stare crawling over her, measuring, calculating. "You," he barked. "Name." She spoke her name clearly, evenly, without hesitation. Her voice was steady, but it didn't carry like the others. No sharp edge, no effort to impress. Just a simple truth. The instructor leaned forward, studying her face as though searching for something hidden there. Then, with a sharp sniff, he muttered, "We'll see how long you last." The men around her smirked, their confidence reinforced by the instructor's doubt. To them, she was already marked as the first to fail. Inside the barracks, the recruits were given barely 10 minutes to claim bunks and change into training gear. The room buzzed with nervous chatter, jokes, and bravado. Stories of past fights, past failures, and dreams of glory bounced off the concrete walls. She chose a corner bunk, slid her bag beneath it, and began changing without comment. Her movements were efficient, stripped of hesitation, as if she'd done this ritual countless times before. Yet she didn't join the chatter. She didn't respond when another recruit sneered, "You lost? Wrong camp, sweetheart?" She tied her boots tightly and looked up once, her eyes briefly meeting his. Something in her gaze made him fall silent. Not anger, not fear, just a weight he couldn't name. When they assembled again outside, the SEAL medic made his first appearance. He walked differently from the instructors, not with the exaggerated authority of someone proving dominance, but with the steady gait of someone who had already seen too much. His uniform carried subtle marks of wear, his eyes sharp but distant, as though they looked at the world from somewhere else entirely. The recruits straightened at the sight of him, sensing instinctively that he was different. Unlike the instructors, he didn't shout. He scanned them with the cool precision of a surgeon examining an X-ray, seeing past the surface to the weaknesses beneath. His gaze slid over the loudest recruits first, the ones flexing and smiling, hungry to impress. Then, almost lazily, it drifted toward her. For a moment, their eyes met. He looked at her once, then dismissed her. Not worth his time, his expression seemed to say. And that suited her perfectly. The first drill was chaos. Recruits were ordered to sprint across the yard, drop, crawl through mud, and leap over barriers. Shouts filled the air, bodies slammed into the ground, curses echoed from every corner. Some recruits powered through with brute strength. Others wheezed and stumbled, already faltering under the pressure. She moved with quiet precision. She wasn't the fastest, nor the strongest, but she was steady. She didn't waste energy on grunts or curses. Every action was deliberate: drop, crawl, rise, leap. Her silence was unnatural in the storm of noise, a ghost moving through fire. By the time the group collapsed at the finish line, gasping for breath, she sat quietly at the edge, her chest rising and falling with measured control. The medic noticed. He didn't comment, but his brow furrowed slightly. That night, in the mess hall, laughter and complaints filled the air. Recruits traded insults over trays of food, bragging about endurance or whining about blisters. She ate in silence, her fork moving steadily from plate to mouth. She didn't react when another recruit mocked her. "What, cat got your tongue? Or are you saving your breath for when you actually quit?" No anger crossed her face. No smile either. She just kept eating, her silence heavier than words. The medic, seated at the far side of the hall, caught the exchange. Again, he said nothing. But the thought gnawed at him. Why didn't she speak? By lights out, the barracks buzzed with whispers. She won't last a week. She's too quiet. Bet she's terrified. She looks weak hell. I'd carry her pack for her. Laughter followed each comment, but she lay still in her bunk, eyes open to the ceiling, her body unmoving. She wasn't listening to their words. She was listening to herself, steadying her breathing, feeling the rhythm of her heartbeat, counting it as she always did when preparing for battle. For her, silence wasn't emptiness. It was survival. At dawn, when the instructors stormed in, blowing whistles and shouting, she was already awake. Boots tied, bag packed, eyes sharp. No one noticed. And she preferred it that way. For now. Because the test hadn't truly begun. The morning sun was merciless, burning across the compound as if conspiring with the instructors to break them before the day truly began. Heat shimmered above the dirt track where the recruits had gathered, their faces already glistening with sweat, though it was barely past dawn. "Drop your bags." The lead instructor barked, his voice like a whip. "Push-ups, now." Boots thudded as duffels hit the ground. Groans rippled through the line, but no one dared speak against the order. The recruits fell to the dirt, palms sinking into the hot ground, and began pumping their bodies up and down in rhythm with the instructor's count. "Faster. You think this is a game? You're not fit to clean the mud off C.A.L.'s boots." The cadence was brutal. Within minutes, bodies trembled and elbows buckled. Some recruits grunted through clenched teeth, desperate to prove they could keep up. Others cried out, their voices betraying weakness. A yard became a symphony of effort and suffering. Except for her. She moved steadily, her face expressionless, her breath quiet. There was no grunt, no gasp, no audible struggle. She kept perfect form, her body rising and lowering as if each push-up were simply another step in a long journey. It was unnerving. The recruit beside her, a muscular man with tattoos snaking up his arms, glared at her between labored breaths. "What's the matter, Ghost? Too good to sweat like the rest of us?" He hissed. She didn't answer. Her eyes stayed fixed on the dirt beneath her, her arms steady, her silence absolute. The instructor's gaze swept over them and landed on her. "You!" he barked. "You think you're special? Speak up when I address you." She pushed once more, then locked her arms straight and looked up at him. Her voice was calm, barely louder than necessary. "No, instructor." The simplicity of it, the lack of fear or emotion, seemed to irritate him even more. "We'll see about that," he muttered, pacing away. Later, during sprint drills, the recruits lined up at the far end of the dirt track. 20 sprints, full length, down and back. "Move like your life depends on it, because someday it will," the instructor shouted. The whistle blew. They launched forward in a storm of dust and pounding boots. The strongest surged ahead, muscles pumping like machines. Others lagged quickly, their lungs burning, their legs betraying them. She fell somewhere in the middle, not the fastest, not the slowest, but steady. Her strides were measured, economical, as if she'd calculated exactly how much energy she could afford to spend. By the 15th sprint, the fastest men had slowed dramatically, their speed eaten by exhaustion. Their gasps were loud, their curses louder. She, however, kept the same pace she'd started with, her face pale but controlled. She crossed each finish line without sound. "Damn ghost," muttered the tattooed recruit again, collapsing into the dirt beside her after the final sprint. "What the hell are you?" She didn't respond. That night in the barracks, the atmosphere shifted. The recruits sprawled across their bunks, nursing blisters, wrapping sore joints, and complaining loudly about the day's punishment. The air was thick with sweat, the sharp scent of ointment, and the sound of bravado. They compared bruises as if they were medals, argued about who had pushed hardest, and laughed at those who had nearly quit. She sat on her bunk in silence, cleaning her boots with slow, careful movements. The tattooed man wasn't done. He leaned forward from his bunk, smirking. "Hey, ghost girl. You hiding something? What's with the quiet act? You mute, or just scared to let us hear your voice shake?" Laughter rippled through the room. Still, she said nothing. She tightened the laces of her boots, set them neatly beside her bunk, and stretched out on the mattress. "Yeah, that's what I thought," the man sneered. Nothing to say, but the silence was heavier than his words, pressing down on him until even his smirk faltered. The SEAL medic watched from the doorway. He often lingered there in the evenings, saying little, observing much. It was his job to know which bodies would fail and which minds would break before the course was through. He'd seen countless men collapse under the weight of exhaustion, their bravado turned to ash. He thought he'd seen every type of recruit there was, but her silence unsettled him. It wasn't the silence of fear. He knew that look, the twitching hands, the darting eyes. This was something different, controlled, measured, a silence that didn't shrink but stood its ground. He found himself frowning. He had dismissed her earlier as weak, too slight for the demands of training. Yet she hadn't collapsed, hadn't cried out, hadn't even cursed under her breath. He left without a word, but she lingered in his thoughts longer than he expected. The next morning, the trials grew harsher. The recruits were ordered to carry sandbags across the compound, up and down the long flight of concrete steps until their shoulders screamed. Sand spilled from torn seams, dust clouded the air, and men staggered under the weight. She lifted her sandbag without hesitation, the rough burlap biting into her skin. Step by step, she climbed the stairs, her arms straining, her breath heavy but controlled. Halfway through, the tattooed recruit stumbled, dropping to one knee with a curse. His sandbag slid down the steps, spilling grit everywhere. "Pick it up," the instructor roared. The man groaned, his strength spent. He looked like he might collapse entirely. Without a word, she adjusted her grip, stepped sideways, and hooked the edge of his bag with her boot, sliding it closer to him. She didn't offer a hand, didn't speak, just a small act that went unnoticed by the instructor, but not by him. He stared at her, stunned, then dragged the bag back into his arms. For once, he said nothing. By nightfall, whispers had spread. Some recruits mocked her silence still, calling her ghost, shadow, or mute. Others began to watch her more carefully, She was not the strongest, not the fastest, not the loudest, but she was always there at the finish line. Always steady, always silent. And silence, they were beginning to realize, was harder to endure than shouting. The SEAL medic found himself thinking of her again that night as he reviewed injury reports. He didn't write her name down, she hadn't needed him yet, but the image of her face, pale and unreadable, kept returning. He had seen men carry themselves with rage, with pride, with fear, but rarely with nothing. He wondered if her silence was a mask or a weapon. Either way, he knew he would find out. And so her first impression was set. To her fellow recruits, she was a ghost present but untouchable, strange in her refusal to shout or curse or complain. To the instructors, she was a question mark, too quiet to trust, too stubborn to ignore. And to the medic, though he didn't yet admit it aloud, she was becoming something he could not look away from. The silence that had once made her invisible was beginning to make her unforgettable. And the test had only just begun. The mornings always began with the sea. At 0400, the recruits were herded down to the beach, the sky still black, the tide crashing cold and relentless against the shore. The instructors believed the ocean was the perfect judge of character, merciless, unpredictable, and deaf to excuses. Hit the surf. The command roared. Without hesitation, the recruits charged forward, boots splashing into the icy water. Gasps erupted as the waves swallowed their legs, the shock of cold biting into their bones. The men cursed, shouted, and groaned, their voices rising in defiance of the sea. She said nothing. She lowered herself into the freezing water, her face blank, her body rigid against the current. The cold pierced her skin like knives, but she didn't flinch. She simply endured. The recruit beside her, teeth chattering violently, spat out, "How the hell aren't you freezing?" She didn't answer. After surf torture came log PT. The recruits formed teams, each lifting massive telephone pole-sized logs onto their shoulders. The weight pressed down with brutal force, grinding into bone and muscle. The instructor screamed for synchronized movement up, down, forward, back, forcing them to move as one or collapse as individuals. Men shouted commands at one another, arguing over rhythm, swearing when the log tilted dangerously. Voices rose in chaos. And through it all, she carried the weight in silence. Her shoulders bruised purple under the crushing load. Her arms trembled, but she didn't complain. She adjusted subtly when others faltered, taking more weight than her share, though no one noticed at first. When the team finally dropped the log, several recruits collapsed, groaning, clutching their arms. She lowered herself to one knee, steady, her breathing controlled. The medic, watching from the edge of the sand, narrowed his eyes. He'd seen strong men broken by the log. Yet she bore it quietly, as if the silence itself carried her through. The strangeness of her silence began to spread through the camp like wildfire. Instructors shouted at her more than the others, trying to break the mask. Speak up, shout. Show some damn fight. But she gave them nothing. Only nods, only the necessary acknowledgments, never wasted words. Her fellow recruits grew uneasy. At first, they mocked her ghost, shadow, statue. But as days passed, their laughter thinned, because she didn't waver. In the freezing surf, in the mud crawls, in the endless miles of running with packs that crushed their spines, she moved steadily, never uttering a complaint. It was unnatural, and in its unnaturalness, it became frightening. One evening, after a particularly brutal day of training, the recruits staggered back into the barracks. The air smelled of sweat and blood, the floor littered with discarded tape and bandages. Bodies ached, muscles screamed, but the room was alive with noise, complaints, insults, boasts. She sat on her bunk, quietly cleaning mud from her boots. The tattooed recruits, still sore from being outpaced by her during sprints. He threw his shirt at her bunk. "Hey, Ghost, you even human? Or did they sneak some damn robot into training?" Laughter erupted. She looked at him once, her gaze steady, and returned to her boots. The laughter faltered. Something in that look unnerved him, as if she'd seen through him entirely. No words exchanged. None needed. The SEAL medic noticed more than anyone. He watched during obstacle courses, when recruits shouted encouragement or frustration at one another. She climbed walls, crawled through barbed wire, leapt ditches all without sound. Her silence didn't weaken her. It steadied her, made her deliberate. It reminded him of men he'd treated in combat, soldiers who endured pain with their jaws locked shut, too stubborn to give their suffering a voice. Those men, he knew, often survived when louder ones did not. But she wasn't a battle-hardened veteran. She was a trainee. And still, she carried herself as if she'd been forged in fire long before she arrived here. The medic found himself unsettled. He had dismissed her on arrival. Now, he wasn't sure what to think. Her silence also had an unexpected effect. Recruits who once mocked her began to unconsciously fall in line beside her during runs, pacing themselves with a rhythm. She never slowed, never sped recklessly, and somehow that steadiness carried others along. During team exercises, though she rarely spoke, she acted without hesitation, lifting where needed, covering gaps, stepping into roles others abandoned. Her actions said more than orders ever could. The instructors noticed, though they never admitted it aloud. One of them muttered to another, "Strange one, that girl. Doesn't say much, but the squad moves better when she's in it." The other instructor grunted. "Yeah, still waiting for her to break." They all break, but she didn't. One night, during lights out, whispers carried through the barracks. "She's crazy. Who doesn't complain?" Not once. Maybe she's mute. No, she spoke to the instructors. "Just doesn't talk much. It's weird, man. It's unnatural." They whispered long after the lights went dark, their words laced with unease. On her bunk, she lay awake, eyes open to the ceiling, breathing slow and steady. She heard every word, but reacted to none. Words, she had long ago decided, were wasted energy. Energy was for surviving. The medic couldn't shake her from his thoughts. He found himself replaying moments, her steady push-ups while others collapsed, her measured sprints, the way she bore the log as if the silence itself shouldered part of the weight. Why didn't she break? Why didn't she complain? He told himself it didn't matter. His job was to treat injuries, not mysteries. But still, when he looked at her, he felt the weight of unanswered questions pressing down on him. She wasn't just surviving training. She was redefining it. As the days passed, the division between her and the others grew sharper. They still joked, shouted, cursed at the pain. She remained silent, her strength unspoken but undeniable. And though no one admitted it, her silence had become louder than all their voices combined. The medic knew it wouldn't last forever. Training was designed to strip away masks, to expose what lay beneath. He just didn't know whether her silence was a mask at all, or the truest part of her. The order came at dawn, without warning. Full gear. Full packs. 40 miles. Move out. Groans rippled through the recruits, quickly silenced by the instructor's glare. Endurance marches were legendary, dreaded for breaking even the strongest. They weren't just about distance. They were about destroying willpower, stripping flesh and spirit down until only the unbreakable remained. She adjusted her pack without a word. It was nearly as heavy as she was stuffed with gear, water, rations, and weight meant to mimic the load of combat. Her shoulders sagged under it, but she made no complaint. The march began. The first miles were almost easy, though the air was thick and the dirt track unforgiving. Recruits joked at first, muttering about how 40 miles would be nothing. Sweat soon drowned their words. Boots pounded into the earth. Packs dug into spines. The sun rose higher, heat radiating off the ground in shimmering waves. By mile 10, Shatter had died. By mile 15, the first recruit collapsed. He hit the dirt hard, clutching his ankle. The instructors dragged him aside, tossing his pack into the truck following at the rear. His training was over. The others pressed on, their faces pale, lips cracked with thirst. She kept her rhythm-short, deliberate steps. Her pack bounced against her shoulders, grinding skin raw, but her breathing stayed steady. Sweat drenched her back, yet her face betrayed nothing. The silence unsettled those beside her. While they gasped and muttered, she moved quietly, as if walking through a storm she'd already endured 100 times before. By mile 25, the march became torture. Boots tore into feet, leaving blisters that burst with every step. Backs bent under the relentless weight of packs. The sun was merciless now, baking the dirt until it felt like walking across fire. Men began cursing the instructors, the course, even themselves. Some stumbled into the dirt, sobbing as they tore off their boots. She stumbled too. The rocks tore into her knees, opening them with fresh blood. For a moment, the medic, watching from the truck, thought it was over. He leaned forward, ready to signal her removal. But she pushed herself up. Blood streaked down her shins. Her pack shifted dangerously, threatening to pull her backward. She gritted her teeth, adjusted her stance, and kept walking. No sound escaped her lips. The miles stretched into eternity. Time blurred. Step after step became its own battle. Each one was a decision: quit or continue. The tattooed recruit stumbled beside her, his face gray, sweat pouring down his temples. Why aren't you saying anything?" He gasped, half furious, half desperate. "You're dying just like the rest of us. Just admit it." She looked at him once, her eyes calm but hollow, and looked forward again. Her silence was an answer more crushing than words. He fell behind. By mile 35, the march had turned into survival. Every step was agony. Packs had rubbed skin raw until blood stained the recruits' uniforms. Blisters burst, muscles trembled, lungs fought for air. The line of trainees had thinned half gone, carried away by trucks after collapsing. The instructors barked for speed, threatening those who slowed. Their words cut deep, but she didn't hear them. She was somewhere else. Her body screamed, her knees ached, her shoulders burned, but her mind was far away, back in the shadows of her past. She remembered nights where pain had been constant, days where silence had been her only shield. Compared to that, this was nothing. Silence carried her when strength could not. Near mile 40, the finish line finally came into view, a checkpoint marked by instructors and vehicles. The sight broke what little remained of the recruits' strength. Some sprinted recklessly, desperate to collapse in victory. Others dragged themselves forward on pure will, each step a miracle. She staggered, her vision blurring, her pack threatening to topple her. The medic, watching closely, clenched his jaw. He'd seen countless recruits collapse within sight of the finish line. Pride often died there, feet from survival. But she didn't fall. Her body swayed, her breath ragged, but she forced herself to move. One step, and another. When she crossed the line, she didn't cheer. She didn't cry. She simply sank to her knees, lowering her pack carefully beside her, as if even in exhaustion, she refused to give chaos any victory. A medic moved quickly, kneeling beside her. Her skin was pale, her lips dry and cracked, her knees torn and bleeding. "Talk to me," he ordered, pressing 2 fingers to her pulse. Her eyes met his, glassy but steady. "Still here," she whispered. Then silence again. The instructors shouted at the remaining recruits, praising those who endured, mocking those who hadn't. But the medic wasn't listening. He kept his gaze fixed on her as she sat, silent, refusing to collapse completely. He'd misjudged her. When she had first arrived, he'd seen a fragile woman, unlikely to last the week. He'd dismissed her as weak, irrelevant. But today, she had endured what broke men twice her size. And she had done it without a sound. The medic felt something rare stir inside him, respect. That night, the barracks were silent in a different way. The recruits were too broken to brag, too exhausted to mock. Some lay moaning, others slept without stirring. She sat on her bunk, her knees wrapped in fresh bandages, her eyes distant. The tattooed recruit, his feet raw and blistered, looked at her from across the room. He didn't speak. For the first time, there was no joke, no insult. Only silence. The kind of silence that carried weight. The medic wrote his report later, his pen pausing above the page. He had to note injuries, progress, and potential. His words were clinical, detached by habit. But when he reached her name, his hand stalled. How did he describe what he'd seen? Not just endurance, not just silence, something more. Finally, he wrote one line. Unyielding, worth watching. She slept without dreams that night, her body battered, her silence intact. But the medic did not sleep easily, because for the first time, he wondered if the instructors were wrong. Maybe strength wasn't in the loudest, or the strongest, or the fastest. Maybe it was in the wounded who stayed silent and refused to fall. The barracks buzzed with rumors. Whispers of her endurance march had spread through the ranks like wildfire. Recruits who once mocked her silence now looked at her differently. Some with grudging respect, others with unease. She had crossed the finish line, bloodied, broken, yet unyielding, without a single cry of pain. Still, no one truly understood her. She remained a mystery, a ghost who endured without sound. And for some, that was more unnerving than any scream. The SEAL medic felt it too. He had written in his report that she was unyielding, worth watching, but those words were inadequate. He knew it. Something in her silence gnawed at him, a question unanswered. That question would soon be put to the test. The announcement came before dawn. Today, combat medical training. Simulations will be brutal. Chaos will be real. If you can't keep calm, you'll kill your team. Understood? The recruits shouted in unison. Yes, instructor. She, as always, gave only a firm nod. The training grounds had been transformed into a nightmare of noise and blood. Speakers blasted simulated gunfire. Smoke grenades turned the air into a choking haze. Mannequins and live role players screamed as though they were dying, their bodies smeared with fake blood, their cries piercing the mind. The goal was simple. Treat the wounded under fire. Apply every skill drilled into them, tourniquets, pressure dressings, airway management, while ignoring the chaos. Simple in theory, devastating in practice. The first groups went in. One recruit froze, hands shaking as his patient bled out before him. Another fumbled so badly with a tourniquet that an instructor ripped it from his hands, screaming that he'd just killed his teammate. The medic watched from the sidelines, arms folded. He wasn't surprised. Training broke nerves faster than muscles. When her turn came, he leaned forward, curious. She dropped to her knees beside her assigned casualty, a fellow recruit shrieking in mock agony, red paint gushing from a simulated leg wound. Gunfire cracked overhead, smoke stung her eyes, and instructors screamed conflicting orders. But she didn't flinch. Her hands moved with calm precision. She cut through fabric, exposed the wound, and wrapped the tourniquet high and tight, twisting it until the bleeding slowed. Her patient thrashed, shouting obscenities, trying to break her focus. She ignored the noise, her eyes locked on the wound, as though the world around her didn't exist. Airways closing. An instructor shouted, testing her. She pivoted smoothly, tilting the patient's head, clearing the passage, checking vitals. Her face was pale, her jaw clenched, but her hands never trembled. While others panicked, she commanded, "Hold this pressure. Keep breathing. Stay awake," she ordered her partner, her voice steady and firm. The instructors stopped shouting. Even the noise from the speakers seemed distant. The medic narrowed his eyes. This wasn't just training. This was memory. He recognized the signs immediately. The stillness in her face. The mechanical calm in her movements. He had seen it before soldiers who had lived through real chaos, who had stared down real blood, who had touched real death. But she was no soldier. Not yet. So where had she learned it? Minutes later, her simulation ended. The casualty was stabilized, the chaos around her silenced. She sat back on her heels, her uniform streaked with fake blood, her face unreadable. The instructors exchanged glances. None of them spoke, but the shift was palpable. They had been expecting another fumble, another collapse. Instead, they had seen a recruit who could move through simulated carnage as if born for it. The medic approached. "You," he said, his voice low but commanding. She looked up at him, her eyes steady. "Where did you learn that?" he demanded. Her silence held for a long moment. Finally, she answered with 2 words. "Life taught." Then she said nothing more. The rest of the day passed in a blur for the other recruits. Some struggled, some improved, but no one matched her calm precision. Even the loudest voices had quieted when she walked by. The mocking nickname Ghost no longer carried the same bite, it carried weight. In the barracks that night, the tattooed recruit, the one who had mocked her most, finally spoke without sarcasm. "You've done this before?" he said quietly, not a question but a realization. She tied her boots tighter, her hands moving with their usual calm. He waited for an answer, but she gave none. And in her silence, he found himself nodding, as if the truth were too heavy to be spoken aloud. The medic couldn't let it go. He cornered one of the instructors after hours. "Who is she? Where'd she come from?" The instructor shrugged. "Paperwork says civilian background. Nothing special. No prior service. Why?" The medic frowned. That wasn't the work of a civilian. That was something else. But no record explained what he had seen. He began watching her more closely after that. During drills, he noted the way she handled pain hers and others. When a recruit gashed his hand on barbed wire, she wrapped it neatly before he even reached the medic's tent. When another collapsed from heat exhaustion, she hauled him upright without a word, dragging him to shade. She was quiet, but she was never absent. Always observing, always steady. And every time he looked into her eyes, he saw not emptiness but history. The breaking point came a week later during a night drill. Recruits stumbled through darkness, flares bursting overhead, instructors barking orders through megaphones. Chaos reigned, designed to disorient and destroy focus. Another recruit panicked when his partner went down, thrashing wildly, screaming he couldn't remember what to do. He froze, eyes wide, paralyzed by fear. Before the instructors could intervene, she dropped beside him. Her hands took over, calm, deliberate, commanding. "Listen to me," she told the recruit, her tone sharp but steady. "Breathe. Do exactly what I say." Her voice cut through the noise like a blade. And the recruit listened. Together, they stabilized the casualty. And when the drill ended, the instructors said nothing. They didn't need to. Everyone had seen it. That night, the medic couldn't stay silent anymore. He approached her as she sat alone, wrapping her bandaged knees. "You've done this before," he said quietly. Not a question, an observation. She looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the dim barracks light. For a long time, she said nothing. Then, finally, "I've seen more blood than most people ever should." Her words hung in the air, heavy, final. The medic didn't push further. He only nodded, his chest tight with unspoken respect. And next morning, he shocked the unit. During roll call, he spoke up. "I want her in advanced training." Immediately, gasps rippled through the recruits. The instructors exchanged startled glances. The medic never singled anyone out, especially not a trainee. But he stood firm. "She has what others don't. She can carry calm into chaos. Train her." The silence that followed was louder than any order. She said nothing, only nodded once, as if she had been expecting it all along. That night, whispers filled the barracks again, but they were different now. "She's special," the medic demanded her. "She's not like the rest of us." And for the first time, no one mocked. No one laughed. They only stared at her in quiet awe. She lay on her bunk, staring at the ceiling, her hands folded across her chest. She hadn't sought recognition, hadn't asked for advancement. But the medic's words had broken the invisible wall around her. And though she remained silent, the truth had been revealed. She was no ghost. She was a survivor. And survivors don't need to shout. The request for her advanced training sent shockwaves across the unit. Never before had the SEAL medic singled out a recruit, much less demanded her promotion. Recruits whispered it was favoritism. Some muttered it was a test, but most fell into quiet curiosity. Who was she, really? She ignored the whispers. As always, she remained silent. But inside, her silence was fraying. Because the medic's demand had awakened memories she had buried deep. The night after the announcement, she couldn't sleep. The barracks were filled with snores, groans, the restless murmurs of exhausted bodies. But she lay awake, her eyes fixed on the shadows crawling along the ceiling. She remembered another ceiling, another night, and blood. Years before, in a town most people never thought about, her life had been marked by violence. Her father, a man with a temper like fire and fists to match, had taught her the first lesson of silence. Crying only fueled his rage. Speaking back made it worse. The only safety was in stillness, in swallowing the pain until it became invisible. She had learned to hide her bruises beneath long sleeves, to smile when questioned, to remain quiet when accused. But silence wasn't just survival. It was armor. The second lesson came later, on a night that changed everything. She had been walking home when screams shattered the air. A car had swerved off the road, crashing into a ditch. Inside, a family was trapped. Flames licked the edges of the vehicle, smoke pouring upward. Bystanders stood frozen, paralyzed by fear. But she moved. She broke the window with a rock, cut her hands on the glass, dragged the crying child free. The mother was bleeding heavily, her leg twisted at an unnatural angle. She pressed her shirt against the wound, holding pressure with every ounce of strength she had. The woman survived. The child survived. She didn't tell anyone. That night, as she washed the blood from her hands, she realized something terrifying and liberating. Pain didn't scare her anymore. Her silence had begun as fear. Now it became power. Back in training, the medic began noticing small cracks in her calm. not weakness, fragments of truth breaking through. During a medical drill, when a role player screamed about a broken leg, her face had stiffened not from the noise, but from recognition. Later, when another recruit joked about how no one really bleeds that much, her eyes darkened, her lips pressing into a thin line. The medic filed it away. He had seen trauma survivors before. They carried ghosts in their eyes. She was carrying an army. The breakthrough came late one evening. The medic found her sitting outside the barracks, knees drawn to her chest, her bandaged hands resting quietly on them. The moonlight caught the faint scars crisscrossing her forearms. He crouched down. "You've seen real blood before, haven't you?" She didn't answer at first. Her silence was her shield, but his gaze stayed steady, not prying, not demanding, just waiting. Finally, her voice broke the night, low, steady, weighted. "My father used to beat the noise out of me. I learned not to scream, not to cry, not to let him win." The medic's chest tightened, but he said nothing. She continued, her words like stones pulled from a river. "Later, I saw worse. Accidents, violence, people dying in my arms. I was just a girl, but no one else moved. No one else helped. So I did. And when it was over, they all looked at me like I was strange. Like I wasn't supposed to keep calm while everyone else broke." She exhaled slowly. Silence became the only thing I could trust. It doesn't lie. It doesn't hurt. Her eyes lifted to meet his. "But it makes people afraid of me." The medic swallowed hard. He had seen battlefield medics crumble after one tour. She had carried a lifetime's worth of trauma before even stepping into uniform. "You're not strange," he said finally, his voice rough. "You're forged." She didn't answer. But for the first time, her silence wasn't empty. It was seen. Word of her past didn't spread. She never shared it with anyone else. To the other recruits, she remained an enigma. But the medic's respect deepened into something heavier, something close to responsibility. He began pushing her harder. Extra drills, longer marches, more complex medical scenarios. And every time, she met his demands with the same quiet resilience. But inside, she was no longer hiding behind silence. Now she was wielding it. The unit felt the shift. The tattooed recruit, who had once mocked her, found himself glancing at her for guidance during drills. Others followed her lead without her saying a word. She became a pillar, not through orders or speeches, but through presence. Her silence had become contagious. One night, during an advanced scenario, the instructors staged a simulated mass casualty. Smoke, screams, multiple victims bleeding out at once. The recruits panicked. Chaos consumed the field. But she moved like a conductor among broken instruments, directing with gestures, stabilizing one patient, then another. Her calm rippled outward, pulling others back from the brink of panic. By the end, every simulated casualty was stabilized. The instructors, hardened veterans, stood silent. And the medic, watching her, knew the truth. This wasn't training for her. This was memory. Later, he found her again, alone in the quiet. "You know why I asked for your training, don't you?" he said softly. She glanced at him, her face unreadable. "Because you've already lived what others only prepare for." Her lips parted, as if to argue, then closed again. Slowly she nodded. The truth was out now. Not shouted, not confessed, but revealed, piece by piece, until her silence no longer felt like mystery, but survival. The medic left her then, but his thoughts lingered. She was wounded, yes, scarred by years of violence, haunted by memories of blood and silence. But those wounds had not broken her. They had sharpened her into something rare, something worth fighting for. And though she never asked for it, The truth was clear. Her silence was no longer just her shield. It was her strength. That night, for the first time in years, she slept without dreams. Because finally, someone had seen her. And that, more than endurance, more than training, was what she had been waiting for. The decision wasn't immediate. When the SEAL medic had first demanded her advanced training, the instructors had exchanged skeptical looks. Their silence was louder than any argument. Recruits didn't skip rungs. They earned each step the hard way, grinding through failure after failure. But he had repeated himself, his voice firm, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. "She's ready." That demand had shocked the unit more than the endurance march or the medical drills. The medic, known for being harder than steel, never praised, never singled anyone out. Yet here he was, putting his reputation on the line for her. The instructors didn't answer him that day. They only nodded, promising to consider. But everyone knew something had shifted. In the days that followed, the recruits watched her differently. The whispers had changed. "She's untouchable." The medic picked her. "She's not like us." Yet there was no resentment in their tones anymore. Not after what they had seen. The tattooed recruit, the one who once mocked her the loudest, was the first to break the silence. During a night march, when another trainee stumbled, he reached out, catching the man's pack before it dragged him into the dirt. And when he looked at her afterward, he didn't smirk. He nodded. She returned the gesture, quiet but meaningful. Respect was contagious. The instructors, still skeptical, decided to test her further. If she was truly advanced, she would have to prove it in front of everyone. They staged one of the harshest scenarios in the playbook, a full-field medical combat simulation. The recruits were divided into teams, each given casualties to treat on navigating smoke, gunfire, explosions, and live role players screaming for help. It was chaos by design, an arena meant to crush even the most composed. The medic oversaw the drill, his eyes never leaving her. When the signal flares burst and the chaos began, panic tore through the field. Teams scattered, shouts overlapping with simulated gunfire, smoke blinding vision. Recruits fumbled with gear, their nerves unraveling. She did not scatter. She moved with steady precision, her steps deliberate even in the haze. Her first casualty was bleeding out from a femoral wound. She snapped her tourniquet high and tight, applied pressure, and shouted for a teammate to hold. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through panic like a blade. "Stay with me. Pressure here. Don't look away." Her teammate obeyed. From there, she flowed across the battlefield, checking wounds, directing hands, stabilizing the broken. She didn't try to do everything herself. She commanded quietly, pushing others to act, pulling them back when fear froze their hands. The medic, watching, felt something stir in him that he rarely felt: pride. This wasn't luck. This wasn't chance. She had turned her silence into leadership. The simulation dragged on for an hour, a grueling test of body and mind. One recruit broke down midway, dropping to his knees, sobbing that he couldn't do it. She was beside him instantly. "Look at me," she ordered, her tone firm but calm. "You can. Right now, you will. Hold this bandage. Don't think, just do." Her eyes locked onto his until his trembling stilled, until his hands obeyed. It wasn't yelling. It wasn't force. It was presence. And it worked. When the final whistle blew, silence fell across the field. Smoke drifted lazily into the night sky. Recruits collapsed where they stood, exhausted. She remained on her knees beside her last patient, hands pressed firmly on the wound, her breathing steady despite the weight of fatigue pressing down on her. The instructors exchanged glances again, but this time there was no skepticism, only acknowledgement. The medic stepped forward, his voice carrying across the field. You all saw it. She didn't just treat casualties. She kept you together. She kept you alive. His fingers swept across the recruits, then landed back on her. That's why I demanded her training. The recruits, battered and broken, didn't argue. They didn't scoff. Instead, they nodded. One by one. Recognition had been earned. That night, in the barracks, no one whispered about her anymore. No mocking, no suspicion. Only quiet respect. The tattooed recruit approached her bunk. He looked down at her, awkward, his bravado stripped away. You carried us, he admitted. Without you, I'd have tapped out. Probably the rest of us too. She said nothing, only gave a small nod. But in her silence, he saw something more powerful than words. Respect, mutual and unspoken. The medic, writing his report later, didn't hesitate this time. He didn't scribble one vague line. He wrote clearly, his handwriting sharp and deliberate. Candidate displays extraordinary calm under pressure. Silent leadership. Commands respect without force. Recommend immediate advancement. He paused, then added one more line. She is the one they follow. Word reached the higher ranks within days. The official decision came shortly after. She would be moved to advanced training. The announcement was made before the unit during morning formation. The commanding officer read her name, then declared, effective immediately, she will join advanced combat medic instruction. A murmur rippled through the ranks, but it was brief. The recruits didn't protest. They didn't question. Instead, they clapped. Not all at once. Not loud. But one by one, the sound grew until it filled the courtyard, rough, uneven, but genuine. She stood motionless, her expression calm, her silence unbroken. But inside, for the first time, she felt something shift. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was seen and respected. That night, she sat outside under the stars. The medic found her there, as he often did. You've earned this, he told her simply. Her eyes stayed on the horizon. I didn't ask for it. No, he agreed. That's why it means more. She turned to him then, and for the first time since he had met her, he saw the faintest flicker of a smile. It wasn't wide, it wasn't proud, it was something softer. Gratitude. The recruits inside the barracks spoke of her differently now. No longer the ghost, no longer the weak one. She was the standard. And though she never raised her voice, never demanded, never bragged, they followed her anyway. In silence, she had endured. In silence, she had survived. And now, in silence, she had earned respect. Not just from the recruits, not just from the instructors, but from the one man who had seen through her armor, the medic who had demanded her training, and through him, from everyone else. For the first time, the weight she carried didn't feel like a wound. It felt like a weapon, and the world was finally starting to notice. The announcement of her advancement did more than promote one recruit. It shifted the air around the entire unit. The others felt it in the way they trained, the way they looked at her, the way they carried themselves. No one said it outright, but everyone knew. If she could endure, they had no excuse. Her silence had become a mirror. It reflected their own weaknesses, their own fears, and dared them to do better. In advanced training, the pressure doubled. The drills were longer, harsher, merciless in design. Every day, instructors pushed them to their breaking points because combat would push harder. But she didn't falter. Where others shouted to release their frustration, she remained calm. Where others begged for mercy, she held her tongue. Her silence wasn't empty anymore. It carried weight, a steady presence that steadied others. Recruits who once avoided her now sought her out during drills. Not for words of encouragement, She rarely spoke but for her presence. Just standing beside her in formation made them believe they could endure too. The tattooed recruit, once her loudest critic, had become her shadow. During one brutal exercise in freezing rain, he nearly collapsed, his lips blue, his body shaking violently. She glanced at him once, then offered her arm. He leaned on her without shame. "You don't quit," he muttered through chattering teeth. "So I won't either." She didn't reply. She didn't need to. The SEAL medic watched it all with a quiet satisfaction. He had known she was different, but even he hadn't expected this ripple effect. She hadn't just earned respect. She had transformed it into something larger. She had become a standard, a silent force reshaping those around her. And yet, he never forgot the truth she had shared beneath the moonlight, that her silence had been born from wounds. Every time he saw her steady hands, her unflinching gaze, he wondered how much pain she had endured to forge that strength. One evening, after a particularly grueling combat simulation, he found her again on the edge of the training field. Her knees were scraped raw, her hands swollen, her uniform streaked with dirt. She was staring up at the stars, as if they were the only things that could understand her. He sat beside her without asking. "You know," he said quietly, "silence can be a weapon. But it doesn't have to be a prison." She tilted her head toward him, her eyes reflecting the faint starlight. "I know," she whispered. It was the first time he had ever heard her voice soften. Word of her spread beyond the unit. Other instructors, curious about the medic's chosen recruit, came to watch her in drills. Some left with grudging respect, others with silent admiration. But no one dismissed her anymore. She had shocked them all. Graduation day came like a storm. The recruits, battered and hardened, lined up in formation. Families stood in the distance, cheering, waving. Some recruits wept openly as they received their insignia, the culmination of months of torment. She stood tall, her expression calm, her silence unbroken. When her name was called, the clapping grew louder than expected. Recruits who had once mocked her shouted her name, their voices carrying pride. Even the tattooed recruit, grinning wide despite the scars lining his face, clapped until his hands stung. The medic stepped forward afterward, clasping her shoulder. "You didn't just pass," he said quietly. "You changed them." She looked at him then, her lips curving into the faintest trace of a smile. Without saying a word, "Exactly," he replied. But her story didn't end there. In the months that followed, new recruits arrived, fresh faces full of bravado, fear, and uncertainty. They whispered about legends from previous classes, the ones who had collapsed, the ones who had excelled, and the one who had been different. They called her the Silent One. The stories grew with each retelling. Some said she never spoke a word during training. Others claimed she marched 40 miles on broken legs. A few whispered she had saved an entire team during a mass casualty simulation. The details blurred, but the essence remained. She had endured what others couldn't, and she had done it without complaint, without noise, without surrender. She didn't seek recognition. She never did. But the legacy of her silence lived on in those who trained after her. New recruits, when they struggled, found themselves thinking of her. If she could keep going, so can I. Old recruits, now soldiers, carried her memory into the field. In the chaos of real combat, when blood spilled and fear threatened to consume them, they remembered her steady hands, her unflinching eyes. And they endured. The SEAL medic, years later, would still think of her often. He had trained countless recruits, patched countless wounds, seen countless failures and triumphs. But she remained different, unforgettable. Not because she had been the loudest, or the strongest, or the fastest, but because she had been silent. And in that silence she had shown a strength that words could never capture. She never told her full story. Not to him, not to anyone. Some truths remained locked inside, scars too deep to share. But she didn't need to speak them aloud. Her actions had already told the world everything it needed to know. That pain could be survived. That silence could be power. That wounds didn't define weakness, they could forge strength. Years later, when recruits gathered around campfires, swapping stories of training, her name still surfaced. Remember the silent one? The one the medic demanded? She never broke. Not once. Their voices carried admiration, awe, respect. And somewhere, wherever she was, she remained silent still. Not because she was afraid. Not because she was wounded. But because she had already said everything she needed to, without ever speaking. Her legacy wasn't written in words. It was written in silence. The silence that had carried her through pain. The silence that had commanded respect. The silence that had left a mark on everyone who crossed her path. And that silence would echo far beyond her training, far beyond her story. A reminder that sometimes the strongest voice is the one that never speaks at all.